All right, everybody. It is Steve with Real Progress in Action, and it is 12:15 a.m. in the East Coast. Folks, organizing is a really important thing. And, you know, being involved in this movement has showed me time and again how we keep organizing for electoral strategies. That is like the sole focus that we organize around. And these blips, these organizing bubbles happen every 2 to 4 years. The gang gets together, everybody gets excited, everybody door knocks, everybody, hands out flyers, everybody goes to the protests, goes to the rallies, whatever. As soon as that thing is over, that whole network falls apart. It breaks down. Maybe a few friends hang out, etc. But for the most part, most of what we do ends up being very temporary at best. And then as soon as the action is over, the personalities get involved, each one eats each other, and it is over. It's over. It's over before it gets started. And, as we're looking at, what we're facing right now, I mean, we keep belly aching that the political process isn't giving us what we want. We keep belly aching that these things are not working for us, they don't serve our needs, whatever. But yet we keep going back to that same well as if maybe this time it'll be a little different. Now, this is not to say to give up on electoral politics, but it is to say don't confuse electoral politics with actually organizing for the long term for power. Okay. Without having structures and systems and communication paths and an understanding of what the hell your mission is, people gathering is not organizing. Okay. Organizing is so much more than that. It is so much more about building, into each individual the ability to take direct action, the ability to coalesce and come up with ways of addressing your mission and whatever that mission is. And if people don't agree to what that mission is, there's no such thing as organizing around that. It's not going to happen. I mean, people are individualistic in this country. We have had that whole Ayn Rand shoved down our throats. So the idea of collective action, it's almost a joke. It's almost like an impossibility. And what do you see? We have a circular firing squad going on. We have self-righteous anger here coming in shaming everybody that votes, for, candidates. Then we have the other group over here shaming everybody that's not looking at electoral politics as the way forward. We've got a whole lot of stuff going on with people that have chosen to approach state-based programs, but they don't want to hear from the other side who they expect to be their unquestioning ally as they start explaining why the funding mechanisms don't work in that space. Again, clash, clash, clash. That's not organizing. In order to take group A that has a very legitimate complaint and wants to work with you, and you're group B and you're saying, no, 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 you're not a good coalition partner. You're not a good this, go around tagging all the celebrities and trying to make you out to be a troll and an asshole and then trying to say, oh, well, if you would have just done X, Y, and Z, if you would have just gone along with our plan, everything would have been just fine. But it doesn't work that way. Mission, you got to have the mission. And if mission A says to do something nationally, and mission B comes out and says, no, 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 we're doing it state by state, and the two have different goals and objectives, different strategies, different everything. We've got to understand that this movement that we want to build, that we want to be a part of, it's not a monolith. In fact, it's extremely intersectional. It's got people with tons and tons and tons of competing interests. Some of those interests are more here and now, more deadly if they're not acted upon. But fact of the matter is that when you're trying to build coalitions, you've got to hear the people's concerns. You can't just sit there and ignore what they're saying. And to cast them off as a troll, which frequently happens to us folks in the MMT community in particular, when we don't just go along with the stuff that we fully understand is not just wrong, but is actually stupid, that would actually ruin what we're trying to build. But to the uninitiated in that case, it seems like you're just splitting, that you're just causing some irrelevant debate, and that it's stupid and so forth. But this right here is why, when you organize, when you're working together, when you're establishing coalitions, if you want that coalition to work, you must hear the other people's voices. Just because you have worked on something for a long time doesn't mean A, that it's right, or B, that everybody's bought into it. And so part of your job is to, in fact, bring them into the fold. If you want to organize with them, you can't make demands of them that they do it your way, or they're bad, or they're a bad coalition partner, or they're whatever. But repeatedly now, since Bernie Sanders got everyone excited, we have not been able to see any kind of cohesive strategy amongst that gigantic coalition. None. Zero. And it really comes down to reform or revolution. Those who think reform is the way see electoral politics as a key aspect of that. Those who want revolution kind of need to look around. Both of them need to look around and take a temperature of where we are in the arc. There is so many people in this country that are fat and happy and comfortable, or even miserable, but more comfortable than they would be if they had to actually strike out and, start a revolution, get in the streets, do whatever. The politicians know this too. And the politicians know that those people that are sitting in the easy chair watching Rachel Maddow and others, that those people vote. That's their big value to them, is that they vote. They don't show up to protests. They don't watch alternative media, and they live somewhat fearfully. They literally vote. So when you're organizing and you're trying to assess whether it's reform or revolution, just know that unless you're tapping into those people, that great silent majority, it doesn't matter how angry you are. It doesn't matter how right you are. It doesn't matter how absolutely 100% unassailable your argument is. What matters is that you're not reaching those people that are plugged in to the mainstream media, that are plugged into that whole propaganda machine. So you've got to ask yourself, what the hell are you organizing about? What are we organizing about? What is the point of getting together? Is it just to have a party? Is it just to, hang out? Is it just to feel edgy? What exactly is organizing? And more importantly, what is it organizing for power? I mean, if you don't have an understanding of your mission, whatever you're organizing for is going to fail. I mean, we have seen countless folks mobilize. In other words, people collect. Okay. Mobilizing is kind of a fart in the wind, without organizing, without building structures to support ongoing actions, ongoing business, ongoing communications, etc. So if you were going to try as a movement to even pretend that we're developing some sort of an organization, some sort of movement, it's going to take a heck of a lot more listening than talking. And that includes people of color, that includes gay and lesbian, that includes white cis, males and everybody else. Because when you think of class-based struggle, which is what this organizing really should be all about, you know that there's a lot of intersections in that class-based struggle. And not everybody agrees with each other, right? But you know that the 99% is being squashed by the 1%. You know that through bad wages and bad jobs that we're being exploited. You know each of us needs health care. You know, in order to be a real part of this world, you've got to have economic justice. You know that if we don't have environmental and ecological justice, that we're not going to have a place to live. You know that if we don't have peace with justice, that when you're literally trapped in a cycle of violence, people are desperate and they're going to do different things. If you know that we don't have equality for justice, right? If we're not fighting for equality, we're going to lose that intersectionality. If we're not hearing the voices of the suffering, we're going to leave them behind in our own privileged perch. It's impossible to organize people by literally beating them over the head and putting a gun to their head. However, if we have power like the DNC and others do, we could strong arm people into doing it our way. They wouldn't like it. They may not even be bought into it. But to save from getting beaten, they might do it. So, how do we as a movement, as a 99%, as a group of laborers and people who are not in the oligarchy, how do we pull together? I'm here to tell you, I don't believe we're at that point in the arc where solidarity is possible. There's too much that has changed. Too many people are living in 1917, 1919, 1945, 1960s that are not living in today and thinking about how do you organize in the current environment? How do you organize and build power in the current environment? I really believe that anybody that doesn't own the world is part of the working class. Anybody who's not in that elite 1% is part of the working class. We have to pull for them. We have to find a way to connect the dots so that we can figure out whatever the political analysis is today, whatever that theoretical framework for analysis is, we have to pull that together. And we've got to help educate the people that are less likely to understand, especially. We have to invest that time in teaching people. There's something to be said for grassroots organizing, people talking about exactly what it is that's bothering them, and then bubbling that up to the top and using that bottom up approach to make change. But there are egos, and there is the fear, and the right fear, of not following the proper due diligence to dig into these ideas and running off in a wrong direction. And everybody in herd like fashion goes off the cliff in the name of solidarity. See, in the name of unifying, we just go off the cliff. It's because everybody's in a rush to do this. This stuff takes time. It's a long game. Yes, some things can change here and now. Yes, we can try to organize around the things that we have to get quick wins. But as I sit here today, I see nothing but infighting. So if you're a good historical materialist and you're looking at your circumstances as they are, we're nowhere near that revolutionary period that so many people call for. We're nowhere near it. God, I wish it wasn't the case, but we're not. And so having a proper analysis of what we're facing, the power structure that we're fighting against, and the needs of the people, it has to be front and center. And it has to be wrestled through. It has to be negotiated. It has to be discussed. It can't be, here's what we're doing, fall in line, or you're nobody and you're worthless and get out of our way. It can't be trying to shame people into your view. You must address their concerns, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Even if it makes you uncomfortable. Shame on those who stifle debate. Shame on those that try to stir up the pot and pitch fights with people. Stay with policy. Stay with strategy. Stop the personal attacks. You cannot build any kind of power if you have selfish motives. If your motives are selfish, you cannot build power. If you're worried about you and not the larger big picture, you cannot build long-lasting power that way. You need to have the structures, you need to have the processes, you need to have the communication, and you need to have the people buying into the plan, which means they have to be part of architecting the plan. They've got to be kept informed, they've got to be kept in the mix. In Haiti, Toussaint Louverture, who many of us have often thought of as the father of revolution, was anything but that. In fact, he was a former slave owner. And he didn't talk to the people on the island. He only talked to the people that were above him, or in his mind, the enlightened whites. And he just expected the slaves and the other folks on the island to just follow him. And when they realized that he was willing to keep some of them enslaved, the bottom rose up, turned on Toussaint, and Dessalines brutally, as Pascal Robert would say, brutally slaughtered the French, the Spanish, the English, and claimed Haiti as an independent state. But he had slavery. They didn't want to be put back in chains. He had the material conditions of watching people die, of women getting their bellies cut open and have the babies drop to the ground, of people getting buried up to their necks and slathered with syrup or molasses and let the flies gore them out. It's real easy to organize when you see that kind of brutal life and death thing. And for some people, that's going on today with the police in the streets of America. That's going on today. And for those of us who the police are merely an inconvenience, or even for some people who support the police, it ignores the many, many people out there who don't share that experience with law enforcement. So how do you take those disparate groups and bring them together to work as one? Long ago, there was something called Bacon's Rebellion. And we're talking about way back. And the lower class whites and serfs joined with the slaves, the black slaves, and together they revolted. Now, this thing was not exactly what you call the righteous revolution or rebellion, but it was a situation where whites and blacks and others of all walks of life of that lower tier got together and said, we're not going to take this anymore. And so what happened? The powers that be right up above decided that, hey, if we give these poor white slobs an extra bone, a little bit of perk, whatever, they'll separate from the slaves. And then to make sure that this never happened again, they stopped importing slaves that spoke English. And they only started bringing these victims to the states that were just pure Africans. So they didn't have the ability to communicate and with, to organize in the fashion, at least this is the thinking of the slavers. But for a quick hot second, you had unity at the lowest classes, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of anything else, just their position in the totem pole. And they organized and they fought big time. Now, this has happened during Reconstruction in the United States as well, right before Jackson fucked everyone up. They were sitting there literally working, free black men were holding office, free black men were getting, good jobs, they were creating companies, they were doing things. And then when Lincoln was assassinated and, the Reconstruction got derailed, you ended up watching once again the Dixiecrats and the slavers taking power, because there's always a counter revolutionary force waiting to counter any organizing that you do. Any organizing you do, there is always a counter revolutionary force waiting to dethrone you, to knock you off your throne, to knock you down, to stop what you're doing. Now, those people are enemies. That's enemies. We're talking about real, bona fide enemies. But within your own space, within that own thing, competing interests and egos can destroy any chance of class solidarity. Now, I don't want to be ever accused of being a class reductionist, because there is incredible need for all people to make it intersectional, to make it about feminism, to make it about gay rights, to make it about black and brown people being equal, to making them whole, and not seeing that as an affront. But it also requires each individual person and each different group to listen, to listen to the grievances of each other, to listen to what's going on, and listen to the case to be made for their angle. Sometimes a really, really good ally says no to what you want to do. And sometimes that ally has very good reasons for saying no to what you want to do. But if all you're doing is digging your heels in and saying, I don't care what they say, I'm going to do this anyway. Well, that's not being a good ally. That's not being a good coalition partner. In fact, when presented with knowledge, when presented with information, the good ally takes that new information, processes it, and then makes changes. They don't just stay stuck because they spent an awful long time going down the wrong path. They don't do that. That's not what a good ally does. That is not what a good ally does. And so if you think about what I'm saying here, I think it's very important to remember that no coalition is going to be perfect. No coalition is going to be filled with people that 100% agree in lockstep with the ideas. However, if you can get to principles, if you can have that understanding, then you can have that fight about strategy. And fights about strategy should not disintegrate movements, should not disintegrate people in the same movement. And to say strategy defines a movement, I think it's very short-sighted, because a lot of I've seen countless strategies play out over the last 7 years, for example. And of those strategies, many of them only lasted 3 or 4 months, but forever the people that differed in opinion on that one strategy are now at odds for life. For life. And there's no chance of bringing them back to the table to work together again because they continue to poison the well with food fights at the kitchen table, with nonstop mean girls or mean guys club. We're going to cancel you this and that. Exactly the anti-movement building, exactly the anti-coalition building, exactly the way we stay stuck. Ego, ego, ego. We had a lady named Lua that came onto my podcast years ago. And Lua Kamal is a really, really brilliant woman. And I was talking about being awake and why don't people vote progressive and why don't they do this stuff? And she said, everybody's coming into this moment right here at a different point. Their journey has brought them here through different paths. They didn't just come here in the same monorail you came on. They came in here through twisted circle roads in the air, by sea, underwater. They came to this point in time through broken homes, through bankruptcy, through health conditions, through failed relationships, you name it, through brutality, and through privilege. And within that space, if you want to be a coalition partner, if you want to be an ally, you hash that out internally. You treat people in a way where you talk to them privately, give them a chance to hear your side of the story. Now, unless they're your enemy and your goal is to destroy them and your goal is to literally try to render their voice null and void and eliminate them from the plan. If that's your plan, then that's not good coalition building either. In fact, you could say that is just downright destructive. But given that everybody got to this point at a different speed, at a different trajectory, with different baggage that they're bringing to the table as they try to organize, it's important not to be a victim. It's important not to allow someone to abuse you. It's important not to be the abuser. But it's also important to do a hell of a lot of listening. And I don't see a lot of listening right now. I don't see a lot of listening. What I see is a lot of folks that have a real good gift of gab that can create the best bumper stickers in the world, using that as an axe or a gun and destroying people 1 degree of separation from them that maybe are not on the same path, did not get there the same way, still have a lot to learn in certain areas, but maybe know a lot of things in other areas. But you'll never get to know what they know because you've already killed them. You've already excommunicated them. You've already kicked them to the fucking curb. And when Lua talked about that, I thought about that talk. I really did, because I was thinking, why don't these people get it? Why aren't they up on it? Why is group A not getting this? Why is group B not getting this? Why am I constantly getting pushback about economics? It's just freaking black and white. Why? And the reality is that even though they may be misguided, uneducated, unknowing, unknowledgeable, whatever, they still might think they know it. And so how do you dislodge bad ideas and bad beliefs in a coalition? How do you make them see, like, there's certain things that are just simply true, right? When I started my activism, so much of what I said, aside from, standing for Bernie, was MMT. I spoke unapologetically, directly, and sometimes with flair and sometimes with rage. And people that didn't understand what the fuck I was talking about would get absolutely nose bent, upset, pissed off. And so we go back to the drawing board. We try to find a way to reframe some of these things because, unlike academics, the language of the activist is very different. So you try and take this great academic minded stuff and you try and present it in a fashion that Jane and Joe public can consume. And you get a group that understands, and you get this other group over there that's saying, oh, it's this, it's that. They've got a million ideas of what it is, and they don't have a clue what it is, but then they fight you and fight you and fight you. All part of this coalition strategy of destroying movements, right? But that's the truth. When you look at all the years of progressive policy not getting done, the single blocker was the how you going to pay for it story. So when we kept thinking about how to make progress happen, how to make Bernie's, he offered up the first go around 33 trillion in new spending and only 19 trillion in actual taxes. So that's a huge delta between spending and taxing, right? That deficit is scary, scary. And that adds to the quote unquote national debt and all the other things that the boogeyman out there. But MMT shows you that that's not a big deal and shows you how to process that information. Well, if you haven't spent any time learning macroeconomics, literally, if you don't know it, how in the world can you organize with somebody and you're trying to explain how this works? And they're oblivious. They don't care. They're not interested. They think they know better. They think they know better. Now, try and build a coalition with people that think what you're saying is utterly stupid. And then when they bring up something that is absolutely economically illiterate, and then they're confused why you don't support it, those fists coming together are the sound of opposite parties that are going to screw up an opportunity to coalition build. I've never been black a day in my life. So I don't presume to know what the black experience is. I also don't presume to speak for Black America. I have lots and lots of guests come on my program that speak because they are black and they take that case to you all. But I don't know anything. I mean, I've read an awful lot, so I have a historical context, but I don't believe I ever woke up one day as a black man and got to experience what it was like to be trailed around by cops because they think I'm going to do something, or be sneered at by your date's parent for being black and then not wanting their daughter to interracially date, or any of the other things that go on. I've never experienced any of that as a black man, so I can't speak to that. I've never been gay. I don't know what it's like to come out of the closet or to be castigated and beat up for, the way you were born and the way that your uh, desires in your body work. I've never been, or for trans people. I've never been trans a day in my life, but I can be an ally to them. But that means I have to listen to them to know where they're coming from. But here's the deal. Macroeconomics isn't white. It isn't black. It's just sort of like science. It is what it is. And fighting over that isn't black or white or gay or straight. It is macroeconomics. Now, what you do with that knowledge, that can be something totally different. But when you're building coalitions and you know that there's these subjects that most people don't know, in order to tie all that together, they've got to be willing to listen to you. And you've got to be willing to hear feedback. You've got to be willing to engage. And you've got to be willing to try to educate. And if you got to say it differently 5 other times, you say it differently 5 other times. But without that education process baked into coalition building and having a mission statement from which you derive your charter for what you're going to do as an organization or as a movement, and working on down through that process, you're not going to have you're not going to have a movement built for long-term success. And when you look at a skyscraper, you only see the walls. Maybe you look up and you can see how tall it is. But what you normally don't think about is how freaking deep into the ground they had to dig that foundation. Now, most people don't see what's underneath the foundation. They don't look at all the plumbing. They don't look at the 100, 200 feet depth that you got to dig to anchor the foundation of that building. But that's what movements have to do too, to build for long lasting power. They can't just be out there, the shiny object, making bold proclamations on camera or out at rallies with microphones and so forth. You can, but then you end up with vaporware. All we end up is your little speech. It doesn't amount to building for power. You've got to build those structures, those institutions, because the enemy that is the 1% is well oiled, well funded, and well organized. And they've got one thing on their mind: protect their private property and to expand their wealth. And that's it. And until we get that simple, until we can coalesce around some principles that aren't splitter type principles, that aren't strategies that if you don't adopt this strategy, you're no longer part of the gang and we're going to kick you out because that's what people without brains do. Okay. If that's your angle, well, you're never going to get where you want to get to. And we're never going to get out of this. We've watched so many times how the electoral process works. We got rigging of voting. We've got mass media propaganda. We've got huge, huge, huge PAC money coming into the game. And we've got people who only are going to give it about 2 seconds of thought before they pull that lever. And they're going to pull the lever for whoever they follow says to pull the lever for. If they go to church and their pastor's been talking with Clyburn, they're going to pull the trigger for the corporate dem. But maybe there's another way. And this is why I think that with the existential climate crisis we have going on right now, and all the poverty that's throughout America and really around the world from our imperialism, we've got to own this so that we can make changes. And we can't make changes if we're beating each other up, if we're like getting our kicks, friggin' dunking on people on Twitter or dunking on people on Facebook or excommunicating them on Instagram or coming and trolling their YouTube feed or, going out and talking shit behind their backs and stuff like that. See, to disagree on strategy is one thing, but to shit talk behind people's backs and try to destroy them, well, that's just downright fucked up now, isn't it? And I'm sure you know a few people that do that kind of crap, don't you? They're organization killers. They're movement killers. So everybody's looking for a gotcha right now. I don't know why. I really don't. It's disgusting to me. But cynicism and nihilism have taken the place of hope and organizing. And when I say organizing, I'm not talking about what the DNC tells, oh, we got to organize so we can elect the next neoliberal. No, I'm talking about outside of the electoral process so that no matter what happens in any of these cycles, that it's always like this or it's always like this and growing. You can't do that if all you're doing, if your entire existence is dependent on pulling down other activists, all in the name of defending a fucking strategy or something like that. And if you think people don't know what you're talking about, they don't know your experience, they don't know your angle, and you think that it's a better way to educate them by calling them a bunch of shutdown names that wreck their careers or wreck their lives or wreck how people see them, if you think that that is the way to do it, you don't know the first thing about organizing. You definitely don't know the first thing about coalition building, and you shouldn't lecture anyone on it. Differences in strategy and differences in approach are always going to happen. But for this movement right here that doesn't even exist, in my opinion, right now, from anti-maskers to freaking people that want to say the US is broke and we can't afford to do nice things, to other people who are like, anytime you vote, you may as well have killed a baby and all the other insanity that comes with it. I don't think we have a movement anymore. In fact, I think that after all the exceptional, you know, joining and working together that we did under Bernie Sanders, without having that leader, sadly, I hate that we need leaders. Why do we need leaders? We need leaders because nobody trusts anybody. Nobody values anyone's knowledge or experience. It's all authority. Who are you? What are your credentials? Why should I listen to you? It's kind of trash. Trash, right? That right there is blocking us from doing anything. So it doesn't really matter what the establishment does to rig elections, really. We can't organize together for our own purposes so that we can build for power. So until we do that, it makes no sense to point at anyone else, because whenever you're pointing at someone else, there's all these fingers pointing back at you. I used to think that was the dumbest thing in the world, but the more I think about it, the more I see people that are constantly yelling at someone, constantly coming after them. And I'm not talking about disagreeing with them on policy and then fighting about that. I'm talking about they get personal, man. Those three fingers, they're always staring back at you, ain't they? Oh, he doesn't like our strategy. Well, fuck him, man. He's a bad guy. No, it may not be that. It may be that that guy knows something you don't know and your ears are plugged, so you're not hearing it. Never ask someone to forsake the truth in the name of unity. Never overlook the truth, because anything that's built foundationally incorrect renders the entire structure weak and it will crumble. And we've seen it time and again when we don't organize around the principles. And even to this day, after Hillary Clinton laughed at Bernie Sanders about how you going to pay for it, Bernie, it's pie in the sky. And after you hear every pundit on the news talking about it's insane, the budget's out of control, blah, blah, blah. If you haven't figured out that that is the stronghold, that is ground zero for fixing racial reparations, for fixing racial relations, for fixing gender equality, for fixing all these things, that is not the panacea. It just happens to be ground zero, because without economic justice, there's no other justice. And so there's got to be like that understanding. And our movement, the lack thereof, I should say, it won't get out of its own way unless one of its own friends says, oh, yeah, by the way, MMT. And as long as it doesn't interfere with my existing plans, then yay, MMT. But if it infers that what I'm doing is incorrect, well, then you're just destroying my activism and you're just attacking me. And it's that kind of troll level nonsense that destroys any chance of coalition building, organizational building, or movement building. And with that, I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progress in Action, wishing you guys a good night, sweet dreams, and we'll talk soon. Out of here.